Hello, everybody. Ron Wildman here on Middle Georgia Spotlight. Our guest today is not the sheriff of Bibb County, JT Ricketson. Last saw JT here with us was in just before the November elections. You were running for sheriff, and of course that didn't turn out the way you wanted at the time. But in some ways, I think you came out ahead in that deal.
Yes, sir. I can still serve our community.
And you're the new code director?
Yes, sir. I'm the director over the newly formed Code Enforcement Department.
And what does that mean to the rest of us?
So what the mayor did with, along with our 9 county commissioners, is they voted to take code enforcement and separate it out from under an entity that was involving like safe building permits and licensing and all that stuff. And he moved us out independently so we can basically focus deliberately on the blight, the illegal dumping, and the other code violations that we have here in this community.
Such as housing?
Housing, yes, sir. We have a very specific focus on housing. We have hundreds and hundreds of burned out structures here, and so we are starting to look at those where we can take those down and start cleaning up this community.
Not only burned out structures, you've got hundreds of additional homes that have been vacated for years.
Yes, they're vacant, abandoned, dilapidated. I think they call that a VAD.
Dilapidated.
Dilapidated.
We like that term. And what's your job to do with these places? I mean, what can you do?
So what we have to do is we have to go through a process. It's just due process. So we go through when we find these violations. Now we can get these in a number of ways. People can call our office and I'll give you that number, or they can go through See-Click-Fix and they report these violations to us. We then send an officer out there, they'll investigate it. If it reaches, there are different paths that we can go on this. So if it's just overgrown grass and maybe an abandoned vehicle or something like that, those are smaller, more nuisance type of issues, and we can deal with that before getting to court. But let's say it's a vacant and abandoned, dilapidated, rundown building, or it's burned out. Then we have another process, and that's twofold also. So there's a lot of complicated paths that we'll take here, but one of them is we can do the blight tax. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's where we can put a property on the blighted tax registry, and that is actually 7 times the normal property rates for taxes for that. And that is an incentive to get that owner to bring that property into compliance.
Like if I had a dilapidated house.
Yes.
And you applied that blight tax to it.
That's correct.
I'd have to pay 7 times as much in taxes?
That is correct, every year. Until you bring that into compliance.
Or have it totally...
Or have it taken down.
I'd have a choice.
Right.
Now, when it gets to a point where you can't find the people that own these homes, I hear that's a big problem.
That is a huge problem, trying to locate. When you see some of these properties and we start looking at the titles, we use the tax assessor's office, we use the tax commissioner's office, and any other database that's out there. But a lot of times what you find is the deeds have changed. They do quick claim deeds. The property changes hands a number of times, and so it does become very cumbersome for us to try to locate the actual legitimate property owner.
And that is a long, involved process. How long can you give them, or how long will it take before you can just take that house down?
So they had a process that was in place that was not working. And so what we're doing now is we're speeding up. We've expedited that whole system. So let's say we get to a property, it's put on our radar, and we go and we check it out, and it's dangerous. It's dilapidated. So we now will issue a summons for court. So they have basically 30 days. We'll put them on notice. We'll give them a letter of violation and give them a summons. And so we immediately set a court date. So then hopefully we'll be bringing them into court. They'll either fix that property or start working on it, or we'll take them to court.
Now, the other day you had a news conference at City Hall. I had some pictures of that, of you, the mayor, and several other officials.
Right.
And it was mainly your debut in a way, where you were explaining pretty much what you're telling me here now about code enforcement and everything. What prompted Mayor Miller to make this one of his first targets?
Well, he's looking at this, and as our new mayor, he's wanting to do whatever he can to make this a safer community. Well, I can tell you, blight and the criminal element go hand in hand. And so he decided he wanted to come up with a number of structures. And so it was my department's responsibility to come up with a list for him. And so we came up with 57 properties that were burned out and blighted and basically posed a hazard to this community.
And they are a hazard.
They are an absolute hazard.
There's half of a house or a third of a house.
It could fall in if a kid was to go in there, or even a homeless person going in there seeking shelter. Those structures could fall in at any moment.
Well, a lot of our fires are these vacated houses and, as you said, homeless or other folks going in there pitching a fire to keep warm.
That's it. And some of those fires were not intentional. They were just basically there for them to keep warm, but then when it catches on fire and it gets away from them, they just leave the structure and it burns out.
Now, you mentioned more than 50 burned out homes in town, but how many dilapidated homes and buildings do we have in Macon?
There are a couple of thousand.
That many?
And so there's 849 that we got from our fire department of burned out structures, 849.
They know their neighborhoods.
And right. And so when I got there, code enforcement, and this is going from yards and premises all the way to an abandoned building, but there's over 2,500 cases that are active right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
What a job.
It is.
And you wanted the sheriff's job. Now that looks a little easier than what you got to do.
Yeah, I am having to learn a whole lot of stuff. I was a law enforcement officer for 36 years. And so going over into this, there's some things that are very similar, but then there's a lot of stuff that's not. And so I am quickly learning this process.
Have you had to change much in the codes, the rules?
We're looking at it. What's happened is just we weren't enforcing these. We have a lot of great laws and codes that are on our books. We just haven't been enforcing it. And so what we're going to do, the way our new mayor and our county commissioners, they decided to let code enforcement be a standalone department so we can fully focus on that code enforcement.
You know, we talk about the mayor all the time, but you got council or the commission.
Absolutely.
The commission behind you.
Yes, it is 100%. I can tell you all 9 of them, along with the mayor, everybody's in sync on this issue. We are coordinating with the mayor's office. We're coordinating with our public works. We're coordinating with the fire department. So there's a number, and we're coordinating with the sheriff's office as we work our way through this whole process.
So you've sent the letters out. You've got reaction from some of them. So you can start checking these houses out officially. What's the first thing you do?
So what we do, we've had about 22 folks kind of contact us. So that leaves us about 35 structures that we're going to do. So we've got a company that will come in and do what's called an asbestos abatement. They want to check these homes. Some of these homes are several decades old. So they were built back when we didn't know the dangers of asbestos. So they're going to check that, make sure that it's safe. They'll let us know. They will mitigate those issues there before we start going in with a big track hoe and a bulldozer to knock it down.
Now, some people have not contacted you after the mayor sent the letters out. In the future, if any of these folks are out here watching this and they want to get with you, is it too late?
It's not too late yet, because we haven't started the whole process, but we're about to. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. We've got to move forward and start cleaning up our community.
What should they be doing?
So what they need to do is they can call code enforcement. Our number, I can give it to you, it's 478-803-0470. That's the easiest way, and ask for JT. I've been taking all the calls from these folks, and I'm writing down what options. When our mayor sent out his list, he gave people 3 options to deal with. And I don't know if you know those options, but the option number 1 is the homeowner can take care of it themselves, which is great. That's what we want them to do. Fix it or demolish it. Either way, doesn't matter. Let's move forward. Option number 2 is don't do anything, and we'll do that. If we knock it down, then we will put a lien back on your property to recover our cost. Option number 3 is they could donate it to our land bank.
The option about you knocking it down and be paying for it as a landowner, you have any idea what it costs to knock a house down?
That is a great question, and I'm going to tell you that cost can be anywhere from $6,000 or $7,000 to $25,000. It depends on the asbestos. It depends on the weight of the material, because we have to pay what's called a tipping fee. Once we knock everything down and we put it in the big dumpsters, we have to haul it off to a landfill. Well, they're going to weigh all that, and depending on how heavy, how big that structure was, it could go into up to $25,000 or so.
Well, I remember years ago, the fire department would burn some of these down as part of their training.
It is, and that is something we're looking at. But we have to be very, very careful because it's for training only. It's not to burn down a structure. There's a lot of things that make that fire ready, okay? So they've got to do the asbestos. They've got to take out the roofing and other materials that are like that could have tar or something like that in it, because you don't want to burn that. You got to take the glass out, the carpets, things like that. So there's actually a lot of expense that goes into preparing a structure just for the fire department to use it as training.
You may not want to talk about this, but let's say I'm a landowner on the planet Pluto somewhere. You can't find me. So what do you do with my property, and who pays for that then?
Okay, so here's what we do. We've sent a notice through certified mail and through regular mail. We then posted a notice also on that particular piece of property. So that is our due diligence through the due process to make sure we've done everything we can to notify that owner. If these 35 don't contact us and we move forward, then whatever cost it is, we will attach that lien to that property. So then that owner, years down the road when they want to try to sell that property, we're first in line to get our money so the county will be repaid.
But it's still not a simple process.
No, it's not. It is a very complicated process, but it's one that we are working out through the system. We're working out with our county attorneys. We're working with our municipal court judge to make sure that we're doing all our steps properly.
You know, at that news conference the other day, they talked some about the illegal dumps in town, too.
Oh, boy, do we have those. I did not realize, and I've lived here 32 years, and I've seen some, but my eyes have been really open as to how many bad places we have where there's no street lighting at night, there's very little traffic on the street, or it's an abandoned house or abandoned lot, and people have just started using that as their own personal landfill.
All over the place.
All over the place. But I'm going to tell you, I'm putting measures together right now to start catching those folks.
You are?
I am, absolutely.
You want to share it with us?
Some of it I can, because, you know, a lot of times people leave their own identifying stuff in their trash. And so we can do it that way. But there are other methods that I have out there that I can just tell you, I'm working on trying to catch these folks.
Well, that's your criminal background.
Yes, it is. 36 years of it. So.
Now, you know, you were at the, among other places you've spoken to, the Keep Macon-Bibb Beautiful Commission meeting the other day. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you're fighting crime, really. Yes,
because I can tell you there is a direct causal link between blight and the criminal element. So there's a thing called the broken windows theory that they talked about back in 1982. And when you have a neighborhood and you get a few broken windows, what happens is people start feeling differently about that community. The criminal element looks at it and says, well, you know what? These people must not really care that much about their community, and so they move into that community. Well, what we're doing through our mayor's initiative, this blight initiative, tearing down these structures, is we are basically lifting the rock and shining a light out, and we're moving these cockroaches somewhere else.
That's could be a vacant lot before too long.
Well, I hope to be, and it would be great if we could turn some of this into, say, green space or even a park.
We have these little parks around town that they've started up.
Absolutely. Those things do a world of difference. Different from a burned out structure that you ride by and look at, or these kids walk in front of every day going to and from school. Yes, how about a green space?
Well, we're talking about crime and stuff. I want to go back to that sheriff's race just a little bit.
Okay.
We need good candidates for office.
Yes.
You were a good candidate.
Well, thank
Nothing
you.
Nothing against Sheriff Davis.
No, David Davis is a good friend of mine. He's a good man.
But you ran, you didn't win. Do you have regrets?
No, I don't, because I'm going to tell you, for me running, it was a good experience. And I'll tell you my biggest takeaway that I got out of that, I was a public servant for 36 years. And I was a public figure during that campaign for 6 months. I would take being a public servant any day of the week over being a public figure. I love being a public servant. I love serving this community. But had I not run, I may not have gotten on the radar screen to be eligible for the director over code enforcement.
Well, a lot of people will not run for positions, and we need people to run for positions. I'm saying good people to run for these. Would you advise people to think about it in the future?
Well, I want people to step up and step forward, but I'm going to tell you, you take a beating when you try to run for public office, but we need good people to step up and roll your sleeves up and try to help out.
The loss, when you found out you weren't going to make it, how did that affect you?
Well, I'm a very competitive person, so obviously I was very upset, but I came to terms with it and I realized that I had a different path.
Now let's go from that night to this Lester Miller guy.
Yeah.
How did all that happen? You get in with him?
Well, he and I talked a lot on the campaign about different things because he's running for mayor, I was running for sheriff, and we were both talking about the big issues that we had here, and we had a lot of common interest. And one of them was trying to deal with the crime here. And we talked about different ideas of how we could go about handling that. When they opened up that, I put in for the job just like everybody else. But I think my contact with him, but I also think my 36 years of experience that I'm bringing to the table here helped me get that job.
Well, I'm sure you candidates end up at the same places a lot of time over the weeks and months. It has a campaign, and I'm sure he learned a lot just from your
angle. I learned a lot about him. I knew of him, but I never really knew him. But we would be at different events and we would talk about different ideas.
What brought this code enforcement thing up then?
He brought it up to me about some ideas that he had and the way it was previously. And we were just talking about how that department could be organized and things like that. So we talked a good bit about that. But since I've gotten in there and I was approved by the county commissioners, I have really taken on a different view of what I think we can do more with this code department. So I thought one way, but now that I'm actually in the chair, I see so many other things that we can do to help improve this community through code enforcement.
You've targeted nearly 60 burnt-out houses, but last year, let's say you tear all of them down, 60 houses this year. Mm-hmm. Last year there were only, I understand, 8 houses. 8
is what I was told, but we're not stopping at 60. We're going to keep going. When we get these moving, then we're going to start another process.
That would be beyond burnout.
Absolutely. Well, we're just taking things that pose a significant danger to our community.
Well, another program that he started early, the Warm Center.
Yes,
the warming center.
Absolutely.
And that was street people or derelicts, and then others too. I mean,
yes, just homeless folks that needed a place because we've had some pretty cold nights here lately.
Well, thinking about this, I'm saying, well, what would you know about that? But you know a lot about that, don't you?
I know a lot about that, dealing with homeless. I can tell you, my wife and I, we've lived here for 32 years, but for about 3.5 years, we actually fed the homeless community here in Macon on every Sunday afternoon. And we pretty much did that whether it was a holiday weekend or not. We just did that because we wanted to try to give back to the community that has given to us.
I know other people who've done that too in the community, and nobody knew about it. One was the past president of council, Anita Ponder, and her sister. They would load up the back of their vehicle and go out on Sundays doing pretty much what you were doing.
Right.
And
I look at that as being a public servant. You don't need accolades or any kind of attaboys or whatever you want to call that. I just do it because that's what I need to do.
Some of these houses eventually could be fixed up enough where folks could live in them again.
Well, one of the things that we're hopeful for, and I'll tell you this, what's interesting, I just got off the phone before I came over here. I've already had a couple of investors that have called me asking me, hey, what's the mechanism, what's the path for me if I want to try to purchase some of these houses that are on this destroyed list? Because some of them, although they're burned and they're a danger, they still could be rehabbed if somebody wanted to put that investment into it. And so I look at that as another win-win situation for our community.
The free enterprise system.
Absolutely.
In action.
Absolutely.
Now, beyond the houses, what about business buildings and blocks of...
We do have commercial structures that have burned. You can go down Houston Avenue and you can see them. And so all those things are on our radar that we will be getting to. We just have to, we had to start somewhere. And so this was where we started. We took 57 houses, but we don't stop. We're going to be doing this day in and day out, 365 days every year. We're going to do this until we get this place cleaned up.
When you start your day off, what's it look like when you get into that office?
Well, I go from can to cane. When I get there, there's my phone's ringing. I've got a inbox that's full of emails. We do have a lot of people make phone calls to us to let us know about code violations, but also they're using the C-Click Fix system, which I think is fantastic, so they can do that online. So we just have a number of things. And I've said we've got 2,500 active cases right now that I am trying to go back over, look at every one of those and see where they're at, where we're at in the court system, where we're at in trying to get this fixed, repaired.
I'm in a neighborhood, maybe if there's something on the block that doesn't look too good to me, we'll give you a call? Or how does that work?
Give us a call, or you can go through C-Click Fix and report it that way. There's two methods for you to do that.
Now, when you rewrite the codes to a degree, what are some of the changes you have to make?
Well, what we're just trying to do is we're just trying to make sure we streamline our process. So it doesn't take us so long. It doesn't take us years to get something resolved on a piece of property. So that's part of what we're looking at. We're talking with our county attorneys and we're working our way through that system. But we're also talking to our municipal court judge who makes the final rulings.
Those judges are important in this.
Absolutely. I've already had a good meeting with her. It went very well. Just talking about some of my plans, some of the things that I think we can do to start improving this system.
Also, you have to deal with a lot of attorneys.
We do.
On both ends?
On both sides.
How do you handle that?
It's okay.
That's got to be frustrating.
No, it is, but when
can't
they
do
see
that.
well, when they see our intent is only to fix the problem, then the adversarial nature of that environment isn't really as bad as it was when I was doing the criminal stuff.
Yeah. Now, I keep getting back to law enforcement and everything. What are some of the things in these neighborhoods that you've seen over the years that could be stopped by all this?
Well, one of the things that when you see an abandoned house and nobody's messing with it, a lot of times the criminal element finds that and uses that. It's not only just the homeless people looking for shelter, but criminal element looks at it for a way to hide away what they're doing. So you can have crack houses, drug houses, where people are going in there and they're using that to hide away so they can do drugs or sell drugs or store their drugs.
How difficult it is to make cases criminally when you're with the GBI. You arrest somebody, but you got to prove your case and everything like that. And it's the same thing with this. You're going to have to deal with attorneys and judges and such.
Sure. Well, one thing I'll say, when you're dealing with a criminal element, the level of proof that you got to get to is called beyond a reasonable doubt, which is way up here. It's like 95%. Well, when you're dealing with stuff on the civil issues and all, that's just called a preponderance. So all I'm trying to do is tip the scales one way or the other. So there's a lot of things that I can take and bring in to the table on how we can work our system, get our evidence. One thing I'm doing with the code officers is I'm teaching them how to write investigative summaries. They haven't been doing that. I'm teaching them how to take better photographs for evidence. So that way our court, when our judge looks at the investigative summaries, they look at the evidence that we're providing through the photographs, then it makes it a whole lot easier for her to make her judgment on that.
When you get rid of all of these houses, let's say they're gone, how do we keep it from happening again?
Well, we just got to keep hanging on to the code stuff. So when you start to see something go down, it usually starts with really small stuff like a single broken window or a car that's abandoned or the grass and shrubbery is overgrown. Well, when that's put on our radar, we go send an officer out there and we immediately write them a citation for that to get it fixed. If they can fix that within 30 days, then great. No harm, no foul. Let's move forward.
Well, that's great. I'm sure a lot of folks out here today maybe have not seen our program last fall. What got you interested in public service?
You know, it's a good question. My mother was the secretary for the sheriff's office investigators when I was growing up, and just watching her, sometimes I'd stop by to see her after school before I went to my job that I had, and just watching her and coming home and her talking about the different things that were going on in the community, I knew then that I wanted to be a public servant.
And where was that?
This was in Griffin in Spalding County. She worked for the sheriff's office there.
And you watched her and everything, and then what happened after that?
That's right. And so at 21 years old, I was lucky enough. I was actually still in college when I got hired on with GBI.
Now,
And I served
GBI,
36,
we think of them as a huge organization, but that's not so, is it?
It's really not. When I left, there was 278 agents statewide, so that's really not that big.
And did they work with the Georgia Patrol?
We actually, when I was with GBI, we tried to work with anybody and everybody to try to get the job done. It didn't matter who. We were very good at coordinating with a lot of other entities. And see, this is what's so great about code enforcement. I'm working with the sheriff's office. I'm working with the fire department. I'm working with public works. I'm working with the mayor's office. And so this is all what I've already been doing for 36 years. So it's great.
And you're still a sworn officer.
I am.
I see, because of the gun on your hip?
Yeah, I was. When they created the director of code enforcement, they wanted it to be a sworn position just in case, because sometimes when we come up on abandoned houses, we might find the criminal element actually operating there, and if we do, then we need to be able to take action.
You know, these are trying times for law enforcement. What do you think about trying to de-emphasize our law enforcement? Some forces are trying to do that.
Well, what I think about that is when you see the communities that are trying to do that, something is going to happen. I wish everybody could get along, but they don't. There is a criminal element out there, and it will always be out there. And so you need law enforcement for protection. Our goal is to just try to keep the peace.
I'm sure over the years you've run into some officers, however, who should not have been officers in the first place.
Absolutely. And you think with GBI, we investigated officer use of force cases.
That's right. That's
and
right.
so I worked well over 70 of those. And I can tell you, every occupation out there has bad eggs. We aren't immune to that either. But as soon as we recognize somebody that doesn't need to be there, we get rid of them. Because you can't, as a public servant, you're serving the people, and you can't have somebody that's on a power trip or anything like that. So absolutely, no tolerance for that.
Does the offender always recognize his problem when you investigated him?
So I asked that.
The person you were investigating, the bad apple.
Oh, okay. So not necessarily. Some people just they're wired that way. That there are people that can. What we want to do is we want to bring order to chaos, calmness to chaos. And you find these folks when they get in there, they want to jack it up, and because they want to get in a fight. And so you find that personality. I wish there was a personality test that we could just give right off that would tell that. But so that's why we have training programs. We go through mandates. So we get to view them in a number of different scenarios for months before they actually get out on the street. And even when they're on the street, hopefully you've got a training program that's, ours with GBI was at least 6 months before we turn them loose. And so you would hope by that much observation, you would start to weed out and figure out what kind of personalities were out there.
Folks being folks, you don't catch them all right away.
You don't, and sometimes it doesn't surface. Something could trigger that. But the thing is, I had as a police officer, and I'll do this still with code, you and I could be at just fisticuffs. But as soon as you decide to comply, guess what? Just like that, you turn it off. And then I start helping you. I render aid to you.
Speaking of turning it off, we got to turn this off. Time's up. JT Ricketson, best of luck to you.
Well,
we need somebody to get this job done, and you're the guy.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us on Middle Georgia Spotlight. I'm Ron Wildman here at WMUB TV.